This week in South Florida, Nan Rich is a former state representative and senator who built a solid record as a progressive lawmaker. Now, the Weston Democrat is running for governor, but it's been an uphill battle. She's fighting Charlie Crist, a former Republican, for the Democratic nomination. She says she's the real Democrat in the race, but she still trails Crist in the polls. Why is Nan Rich running? What's her platform? Why would she be a better choice than Crist? And could she beat Rick Scott? We'll go one-on-one with Nan Rich. Plus, we finally hear from Mike Fernandez, the Coral Gables billionaire who resigned in a huff from the Scott campaign. The stories people are talking about this week in South Florida. Good morning. Who will be Florida's next governor? The conventional wisdom says it will be either Rick Scott, who's got the job, or Charlie Crist, who used to have it and now wants it back. But there is a third candidate in the running. Her name is Nan Rich. She is a Democrat from Weston with a solid record of achievement in the state legislature. She was minority leader in the Florida Senate and known there as a champion for children's issues and social justice issues. Charlie Crist will have to beat her in August if he hopes to take on Rick Scott in November. Nan Rich of Weston has always been a Democrat. She served in the Florida House and then the Senate until 2012 when she was term limited. She has a long history of civic involvement in South Florida and the state, and we are pleased to welcome her this morning live in our studio. Good morning.
Thank you, Michael.
Great to have you in, Nan.
Glad to be here.
All right, so you've been running for governor for nearly 2 years, and you certainly have a cadre of supporters, but in the polls, you're barely a blip. Why hasn't your campaign sparked more interest?
Well, actually, I think that it has sparked a lot of interest statewide, and we have embarked on a strategy that's a little bit different. It's one that deals with developing a strong grassroots infrastructure around the state of Florida. I've had over 300 visits to communities from the Panhandle over to Duval to the Treasure Coast, the Sun Coast, and
so
all
you've built a
Florida.
network of supporters around the state.
Exactly, and what we're finding is that this is a Democratic primary, is the first step, and that Democratic primary voters want a real choice. They want a true Democrat, someone that they look at and can look at those, you mentioned, progressive kind of core principles that they support and will come out to vote for someone like that.
All right, and then on the other side, there's clearly Charlie Crist, who, as we all know, was a Republican for many years, then ran for the Senate, turned into an independent, tried to beat Marco Rubio, and couldn't, and now for the last year and a half or so, has been a Democrat. Why can't you, a lot of people in the Democratic Party say, okay, we know his history, but we can accept that. You can't. Why not?
Well, again, because I go back to what do we want the race in November for, to make sure that Rick Scott is a one-term governor. Who is the kind of person that can beat Rick Scott? And I believe that someone that draws a clear line, a clear difference, a true Democrat versus a conservative Republican.
All right, so what is the main difference in terms of issues between you and Charlie Crist that should make you more appealing to Democratic voters?
Well, I think, you know, first of all, if you look at our records, I think, you know, it's fine. And I understand that someone can change their position, you know, on an issue. But it's hard for people to believe that somebody changes their position 180 degrees on just about every issue. So when I look at the issues that are core Democratic issues, issues of fairness, equality, kind of social justice issues, I mean, you can start with the LGBT issue. You know, I was on your show many years ago when I was the champion for the gay adoption issue, and former Governor Crist was opposed to gay adoption at that time. Now he has changed his mind and says now he's for it. Same thing with marriage equality. So I think that that people really want to know what he does stand for.
What
and
about
I think you look at record versus record.
Sure. What about reproductive rights? You have been a pro-choice, strong advocate for a woman's right to choose. Charlie Crist says, hey, that's my position too.
Well, again, let's look at the record. And I have, as you say, I have had a lifelong record being a pro-choice, strong pro-choice Democratic woman. And When I look at the issues that have been before the legislature, I've been there as the advocate. You know, we had, there's the money that's given year after year to crisis pregnancy counseling. That's money that's given to really basically have programs promote misinformation, inaccurate information to young women about abortion rights and contraception. And so, you know, former Governor Christ signed a budget with that in it every year, even though I tried very hard to get that money out. So, and I say I'm pro-choice. He has never said he's pro-choice. He says he's pro-life and would not interfere. Yeah. That's a very different position. So, and listen, I come from a background of community activism, as you know.
Well,
I was
you have a long
national
history.
president of National Council of Jewish Women, the most progressive Jewish women's organization that focused, you know, very strongly on women's rights and equality for women. So my record is there, and that's kind of what I'm trying to get across around the state. And that's why it's so important to have this strategy of the grassroots. It's out there talking to people and letting them know my record. The one thing is that there's no question he has a greater name recognition than I did.
He has
He's
been
run
the
5
education
times.
commissioner, he's been a state lawmaker, he was the attorney general, and for 4 years he was governor. You have never held a statewide office.
Exactly, but I kind of find comfort in a precedent that's been set multiple times in this state. And that is that when Bob Graham, Lawton Chiles, and Ruben Askew were running for the first time statewide, they were the underdogs, and they managed to win. There's one other area, when you talk about issues, I think another area of great contention is the issue of public education. You had Charlie on your show, and you asked him a question about vouchers. The largest expansion of vouchers for private schools that takes money away from public schools. He
kind of equivocated on vouchers, not sure it's such a good idea, but he didn't.
Said it's not, I don't know, I'm not sure this is the right time. Now, I say it's never a right time to take money away from public schools and put it into private schools. Public dollars belong in public schools.
All right, but on the other hand, would you not concede that there are some, especially minority children in the state, who have been going to deficient public schools, whose parents can't afford to go to a good private school or a religious school, and the vouchers have allowed them to do so, and the kids have gotten a better, ostensibly, a better education?
Well, that's questionable also, because the accountability is not there. So we do not know whether they've really gotten a better education. I have no problem with school choice. What I have a problem with is vouchers, taking public dollars. See, I believe we need to invest more in our public education system. That's a core value and principle of a true progressive Democrat.
This year in the state budget, Governor Scott has proposed roughly $500 million additional dollars for education. The amount is in total, in aggregate, for K through 12 education is the highest ever in the state of Florida, but it is still below the $7,100 per pupil allocation when you were in the legislature, 2006, 2007. Would you not give Governor Christ some credit? I mean, Governor Scott some credit, and the legislature for an increase in education funding?
Well, I'm glad they increased it after they reduced it. You know, when you talk about historic funding, you have to look at where we were and the reductions. And this increase is pretty much on the backs of property, increase in property taxes. That it's not general revenue from the state legislature. That's the problem as far as I can see, because you're really, when I got to the legislature in 2000, the balance was 60-40, 60% state funding for public education and 40% local property
required
tax.
Local effort.
Now we're the other way around. So that's not, to me, it's the same thing with child welfare, Michael. I mean, the governor talks about record historic funding for child welfare.
Right, he wants $40 million additional dollars this year to hire roughly 400 child protective investigators for DCF. That's a good thing, isn't it?
That's a good thing, but we have had cuts going back to the Christ administration to child welfare, and that $40 million is upfront money. It's the protective investigators. Now, if you leave children in their homes, you must provide the services. 68% of those families where you leave children in the home, the parents have substance abuse or mental health issues. We do not have, the money needs to be put there to provide the services to make sure that those children are safe in those homes. Otherwise, you know, we'll have more of the lost children that
the
Carol
Miami
Marvin
Herald has
Miller wrote
that
about.
Carol Marvin Miller and Audra Birch wrote
Right.
about 477 children over the last 6 years died who had contact with DCF. You know, the fact that 477 children have died who came in contact with DCF, that's a shameful number. In the legislature, at least State Senate President Don Gates and House Speaker Weatherford seem to have recognized it and are pushing a bill through.
It's hard, you know, not to recognize it after you have 477 children who have been beaten, abused, and have died. You know, we need to fund the child welfare system properly. We need to make sure that when we have safety plans, that they're mandated. That you can't just say to someone, well, you have to go and get substance abuse treatment. Well,
you got to have
maybe
fund the
they
programs,
won't, and then you also have to have the funding for the program. So it's a whole combination of things. It can't just be the protective investigators up front, although we need that. But we need the other component of it, or it doesn't work.
Yeah, and Carl Hyacin wrote a very good column in today's Miami Herald about that very subject. Medical marijuana. Do you support the legalization of marijuana for medical purposes?
I certainly do. I signed the petition when, you know, it was going on the ballot. And I have some, actually a constituent, Seth Hyman, who's very active in this whole arena. He has she's not so young anymore. She was young when I first met the family. And I've kind of been educated by them about this, and I have particular strong feelings about if you can do something to alleviate pain and suffering for children who have hundreds of seizures a day, seniors, people that have serious illnesses. I support.
So for a non-euphoric strain of marijuana, that should be legal.
Yes.
All right, Nan, in modern day parlance, you are a progressive, another way of saying liberal, at least on social issues. You were from South Florida, you're a woman, you're Jewish, and there are some people who would say, you know, above the Broward County line, none of that plays very well. What do you say to that?
I would say come with me. Come with me on all of my meetings and events, because people all over the state are concerned about whether their children have a good public education. They're concerned about whether or not everybody has health care. They're concerned about the environment and our water resources. I mean, they're all concerned about similar issues across the state.
All right,
it's not about if I'm a woman or if I'm from Broward County or if I'm Jewish.
It's the issues. Nan Rich, great to have you come in, and I have asked Charlie Crist to come and debate you.
Well,
and he says,
I hope you're successful.
Well, I don't.
Nobody
he
else
says he
has
doesn't
been.
want to do it, but let's see what happens.
Well, let's try it, because
Okay.
I think we owe it to the voters.
Well, I
the
think we
primary
do
voters.
too.
Yeah.
All right. Nan
Thanks so
Rich,
much for having me.
Thank you. All right, still to come, the first public comments from a Coral Gables billionaire about why he resigned and discussed as the chief fundraiser for Governor Scott. You will hear from Mike Fernandez next. Along the way, and the Rick Scott campaign hit some craters in the last few weeks, most of them involving Hispanic voters. Politicians simply can't get elected statewide in Florida without strong Hispanic support, and one of the governor's top Hispanic supporters, Mike Fernandez, recently resigned from the Scott campaign to protest Scott's outreach to Hispanics. Mike Fernandez is a Cuban refugee who became a billionaire by building big healthcare companies and selling them at a big profit. He gives millions every year to charity, and he wrote a $1 million check to the Rick Scott campaign last November when he became its chief fundraiser. But he resigned last week from that job in a huff. Did you resign from the Rick Scott campaign because, among other things, he misunderstood, was failing to reach out to Hispanic, Cuban Americans, other Hispanics in South Florida and the state?
I had a goal when I was asked to chair this position, or co-chair this position, and the goal was to help him reach $30 million. We exceeded that goal.
But money wasn't the reason Fernandez left the Scott campaign. It was his inability to get to Scott and tell him his ads weren't effective with Hispanic voters. And then there was the unpleasant incident where Scott's campaign staff showed insensitivity to Hispanics.
The item that has been identified by the press as being the key item was not the key item. My job was completed. My job had been finished.
Are you referring to the mimicking a Mexican accent by these Anglo campaign people on the way to the Chipotle Grill?
Well, you know, obviously that is disputed by some.
Disputed by the governor himself. What about Mike Fernandez? He's very upset with the direction of your campaign.
We're doing well. We're going to have record fundraising this quarter. We're heading in the right direction.
But without Mike Fernandez as chief fundraiser, he says he still strongly supports Governor Scott. Michael Putney, Local 10 News. The Scott campaign insists no one on its staff ever mimicked a Mexican accent. Mike Fernandez says a friend of his was in the car when it happened. So who do you believe? Up next, we will open the mail. right, let's dig into the mailbag now. We have heard from quite a few viewers about the appearance here recently of gubernatorial candidate Charlie Crist. Joseph Krebs says, softball, where's the beef? He handed the governor's house to Rick Scott. He handed the senator's seat to Marco Rubio. He is a bigger flim-flam man than Scott Rothstein. Along the same lines, we got this email from Linda Miklowitz of Tallahassee. She says, too bad you asked softball questions to Charlie Crist. When will he debate Nan Rich? Where does he stand on reproductive health, on the minimum wage? And on a somewhat lighter note, we got this email about Crist from Kevin Smith in Fort Lauderdale. He says, he brought his own fan. Did he bring his own commode? The home team sets the rules. Yes, next time Charlie Crist is here, he will not be able to bring his noisy fan. We welcome your comments about any topic in the news. Email is the best way to reach us. Send it to twisf@local10.com or write the old-fashioned way. Even reach me on Facebook. All right, still to come, my personal perspective about UltraFest. I think it's time for this overwhelming event to find a new venue. Before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about Ultra, the electronic music festival. It's been held in Miami under one name or another for the last 17 years. Really wasn't that much of a problem when it was held in Bicentennial Park, but it is a problem now that it is held further south on Biscayne Boulevard in Bayfront Park. This park, which is now surrounded by a revived and terrific neighborhood, is not the right setting for 150,000 young people dancing, drinking, and drugging, and also knocking down fences to get in free. The security guard you see here was nearly killed when out-of-control Ultra fans knocked down a fence that should have been reinforced but was not. Ultra needs to move elsewhere. Maybe there is a venue somewhere in Miami-Dade where it can go, but it is time for it to move out of Bayfront Park. The only reason it's there is that the Ultra promoters pay the Bayfront Park Trust more than $1 million a year. Sorry, but they'll have to find the money elsewhere. When the Miami Commission hears arguments about Ultra this coming week, they should deny permits to ever hold it again in downtown Miami. That's my perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday. And remember, as always, stay informed, get involved. I'm Michael Putney.